Today's an interesting day because it is the first time that I have ever been able to go to a gig and bring everything in a backpack and bike there. So in today's video, we're gonna look over using the 11mm versus the Sony 15mm. What's the good, what's the bad when it comes to both the 11mm and the 15mm. But again, I'm just super excited because ever since I got the FX30 and these lenses in, this is the first time where I could bring this little sling backpack, bring everything I need from camera to lenses to gimbal and drone, and have it so compact that I can actually bike to the shoot. So let's do this. Now I'm shooting in this penthouse apartment in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in a high-rise. As you can see while I'm walking through, the spaces aren't huge. This room right here is a perfect example of a room that can really only be used with the 11mm due to how small it is. Using the 11mm to showcase an apartment like this makes the most sense just because space is a luxury, it's a premium here in Fort Lauderdale. While you're here, if you like the content you're seeing in today's video, make sure to hit that subscribe button below to keep up to date with videos like this. Looking back now on the shots from the kitchen, as you see, if you get creative with the angles, the 11mm and the 15mm really did the same job, albeit from a little bit of a different point of view. But then when we start going into some of the smaller areas, like the closet, for instance, that's where you can tell that having the 11mm definitely helps, although you still don't get to see the entire closet, you just get to see more of it. And then obviously in the bathroom, you get to see a little bit of a wider field of view in the bathroom as well. But then there's also the trade-offs of distortion. When you look at those bathroom shots and you see that window in the beginning of both shots from the 11mm and the 15mm, it's very clear that the 11mm absolutely has more distortion, whereas the 15mm is definitely less distorted. So I think if you're looking to get shots with less distortion and they're still somewhat wide, well then you're definitely going to want to pick the 15 over the 11. But if you don't mind the distortion or you absolutely need the widest field of view possible, that's where the 11mm definitely kicks in. The 11mm and the 15mm also share the same front filter size at 55mm, which is really cool because I've been able to use the same step-up ring with my ND filter for both of these lenses. Now it's great that both of these lenses work with the Zhiyun Crane M2s and the FX30, and that's one of the things that has just blown my mind about switching to the FX30. The fact that I could put these small little prime APS-C Sony lenses on this camera that we're using right now, by the way, with the 11mm, and they work on the Zhiyun Crane M2s, and even when I put an audio transmitter receiver on there. It's definitely the smallest professional gimbal setup I've ever used, and I'm definitely going to do a video talking about the Crane M2s specifically. I've spoken a little bit about it with the 15mm, but I want to talk about using it not just with the 11mm and the FX30, but also with some of my other cameras, because this isn't just an FX30 gimbal, but it happens to work really well when paired with the FX30 and Sony prime lenses. The manual aperture ring on the 15mm is not on the 11mm, but that's a luxury feature. That's not even really something I ever use on the 15mm. Now, when it comes to vlogging specifically, the 15 millimeter versus the 11's gonna be the smarter choice, whether you're hand holding the camera or whether you're putting it on a gimbal like I do. That little bit extra field of view, the ability to get a little bit wider on your shots, it's just night and day noticeable, especially when you're on the go and you don't wanna have to set up a gimbal, even though this M2s is crazy simple. This is becoming an infomercial for the M2s. Things change a little bit when it comes to the studio vlogging or content creator setups, where if you're in a studio like this, you could pretty much make do with the 11 or 15 mil. So I think it really depends on the kind of look you're going for. I've used both before. I'll switch even now between here's the 11 millimeter on the Sony FX30, and then I'll give you a shot with the 15 millimeter on the FX30. And as you can see, things are definitely way more distorted on the 11 millimeter shot, but you can see way more of the room here. Whereas on the 15 millimeter, you definitely see a lot less of the room, but you also have a little bit more of a shallow depth of field. The 15 mil also goes down to f1.4 versus the 11 millimeter that goes to f1.8. It's a negligible difference, but because the field of view, the actual focal length are different on both lenses, you are going to get a shallower depth of field on the 15 millimeter f1.4. The closer you get to the lens, the shallower your depth of field is going to be, even if you're shooting at f8. So I think when it comes down to choosing which lens is better for you, whether the 11 millimeter or the 15 millimeter, it's really going to come down to what you're shooting. I think if you're a professional and you don't vlog, you use this as a working camera, then I think the 15 mil is really hands down the lens to get. Now, if you're going to need those wider field of views, then I definitely pick up an 11 millimeter as well. If you're really shooting more content creation or you're shooting a lot of vlogging, then I think hands down the 11 millimeter is the lens to get, just because even though it's distorted, it's such a wide field of view and it's an f1.8 lens. The differences in the build quality between the 11 millimeter and the 15 millimeter, which aren't that big anyways, but the differences aren't as big of a deal, especially with the price savings. The weight on both lenses are very similar. And then of course, there's the sect of YouTubers that do content creation but don't vlog. I think if you're not gonna vlog at all, you're doing content creation and you're using a camera like the FX30 and it's gonna be your studio camera, I think the 15 millimeter is gonna make the most sense, because if this thing's gonna live on a tripod in a studio, you're trying to get the best image you can get, but also have a really light setup as well so you can mount this camera wherever, then I think the 15 millimeter is the way to go. So it really depends in what I like to call the Venn diagram of comparison, where you fit. I think a lot of video professionals fit right in the middle and they can use both, but there's obviously a lot of professionals that can also really just manage with the 15 millimeter, or a lot of content creators can really just manage with the 11. It all comes down to what your use case is going to be for both of these lenses, and then that's going to ultimately decide which lens is for you. So I hope by seeing this video, it helped you a little bit more understand which lens is better for you. I wanted to do it because there's a lot of videos when all of these lenses originally came out a few months back that kind of touched on the differences of the 11 millimeter versus the 15 millimeter, but there was really no one-on-one comparison, which is why I ended up jumping to the 15 millimeter first before the 11 millimeter, because as a working professional, I wanted to have the best image quality possible, so I went for the 15 millimeter because it's a G lens. But then after using it, because I have this YouTube channel and I also do things like film real estate, the 11 millimeter became a necessity for me as well, so I had to jump on that. And going back, if I had to choose one, I actually would choose the 11 millimeter, but because I have both of them now, and I do have select uses, especially with the 15 millimeter, if you're trying to get up close detailed shots without that distortion, the 15 millimeter is definitely great for that. If I end up having to just choose one, again, it's going to be the 11 millimeter. So if you have any questions about the 11 millimeter, the 15 millimeter, you have any questions about my vlogging setup you saw in the video today, or any ideas for future videos, feel free to put them in the comments below. And if you got knowledge and value out of today's video, please make sure to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell to keep up to date with the latest videos from the channel. Until next time, thank you for watching, everybody, and I will see you in the next video.